Hello, I'm Brian Duck. I'm here with Judy Katz and Meal. Oh my. Help me with his last name, Judy. You say it so fast.
I'm sorry.
So we're here to speak to you from Team xAPI Profile. And I'm actually an experienced instructional designer. This is about my fourth session with the xAPI cohort. And one of the teams that I've led in the past include Team Makey Makey. You'll also see me on some of the other sessions later this afternoon. I'll hand it over to Judy for a quick intro.
So after Brian, after we have an intro video on part of what our team did, which was to create a primer for making an xAPI profile, we're going to be going through the process that we went through to start the xAPI profile, an actual xAPI profile for PeBL PRo. And so after that first one in about 15 minutes with Brian, I will get into the second part, which is the making of the xAPI profile. So without further ado, let's go ahead.
Briefing for Team xAPI Profile. So the team included Laurel, Shatan, Judy, Henry Ring, Julian, Peter, and myself. Thanks to Shatan, Julian, and Peter for joining from across the pond. Julian and Peter are from Team Down Under, and Shatan is from Bangalore, India. We also want to thank Jason Haig and Duncan Wielder for joining us during some of our team sessions. And we're going to do a walkthrough of the primer. We're going to talk through slides or look at a demo of the xAPI profile server and review the xAPI profile reference list. The other thing I want to mention is that Judy Katz is leading part 2 of the project demo from this team, in that she was able to build a profile or begin to build a profile for her product, PeBL PRo. So first, let's just take a look at parts of the xAPI profile primer. This is a PDF document that was published as part of this project. It uses the Human Readable Template that was provided by Jason Haig, and as part of his presentation to the xAPI cohort fall 2021. He actually did a presentation to our team that elaborated on the xAPI profile server. The other thing to mention is that Laurel, Shatan, Peter, Judy, Henry, and Julian Davis were all active members of the team and helped to form the document. At the bottom we have thanks to Jason and Duncan Welder, who was able to join us and review some of the details of profiles. The current document is version 1-07, and this is the table of contents from that document. It's just meant to give you an overview, but we talked through some of the references. There's a section on how to read the document and what the purpose is, and then when to use a profile gets into what we consider to be a tiered approach, where you should look at implementation guidelines, the common reference profile, general xAPI profiles, and then profiles for what we call specific modalities, specific versions of interactions. And then finally, if you need to, beyond those, you define your custom vocabulary, and we recommend you consider publishing that custom vocabulary as a new profile. So there's a couple final sections: how to select a profile, how to use a profile. So this is a couple excerpts from the document, from the PDF. We wanted to talk about the references. One of the pieces you should be aware of is that some of these references are becoming outdated. So on this screen we see the details of the references for xAPI profiles. Key to this is that the current view from the ADL is that the ADL's xAPI profile server is the current source of truth for xAPI vocabulary. This indicates that both tin can, shown as 1.2.1, and the ADL's vocabulary server, which is 1.2.2, are out of date. The idea being that 1.2.3, the ADL profile server, has the most up-to-date information and should be your first point of reference. Also of note, though, is the Torrance Learning Profile Flattener, which provides another view and supports additional elaboration of profiles. And this is currently featured in the CMI5 and video profiles on the Torrance Learning Profile Flattener. So first or next, we want to talk about the URL for or location for these documents. There's actually under xAPI Cohort as an organization on GitHub. You go into team-xapi-profile, as you see in the blue on the top of the screen or top of the screen grab, and then the two documents that are outputs from this or this team are the Human Readable Template that Jason provided us, and then our document, the xAPI Profile Primer, dated 11/11/21, version 1-07, is available as the next document and available for download. And that document is actually an example of documentation using the Human Readable Template. So in this section, we'll review details of the xAPI profile server. We want to talk about comparing the common reference profile with the online profile, looking at the profile server and Human Readable Template, and then do a demo of the profile server. So first, we're comparing the common reference profile, or the online profile, as you see on the left-hand side of the screen, with the PDF that's presented on the right. One of the things to notice is if you go into the xAPI profile server and search for or locate the Navy Common Reference Profile, the URL at the bottom under documentation, the purple URL ending in PDF, is actually a link to the file that is shown there on the right. It's referred to as a Navy Common Reference Profile. This is a U.S. Department of Defense and U.S. Navy document. So if we dive into the profile with, on the left side of the screen, the online profile, where we've clicked on the underlined tab for statement templates, and you can see that there's quite a bit of elaboration. And what I've done is compared this with the table of contents. The idea of the area indicated here, 2.2.1 files, is what we're going to elaborate by clicking on this section. And that actually takes us to the next screen, where we are looking at the reference profile, we're reviewing statement templates, and we've gone into the first entry, which is opening a file. So one of the key points, as we can compare and contrast that with what is stored in the PDF has that section 2.2.1 files. 2.2.1.1 is opening a file, and then we get into specifics about statement requirements. Each of these bullet points is a requirement for a statement related to opening a file. And this blue shaded section is an indicator that there is JSON, LD, or other code, but in this case it's JSON that is presented as part of that document. And one of the things I tend to want to tell people is, if you copy and paste out of a PDF or out of a Word document, you want to go through a JSON-LD validator, which is something you can search for online. You paste the code in and it'll inform you of errors that it finds. And one of the common errors in copying and pasting, either from PDF or from Word, is returns or other invisible characters being inserted as part of that copy and paste process. So that's something to be aware of. The other thing to talk about is the additional pages in the PDF document that aren't shown are elaborated within the online profile as well. By clicking these drop downs, you can see that there are determining properties. There are two of them indicated. There are statement rules indicated as well as associated concepts. So each of these plus signs can be clicked on to dive into more details in the online profile. And Jason specifically mentioned this Navy Common Reference profile has been elaborated above and beyond what some of the other profiles on the ADL's xAPI profile server, as an idea of what can be done with it. And I mentioned earlier that the Torrance Learning Profile Flattener has CMI5 and video profiles that are elaborated sort of above and beyond what you'll find on this profile server. So you sort of need to use them in conjunction with each other. Next, we see the Human Readable Template. On the left, you see this is a Word document, which is available for download, again, from the GitHub, as I showed you earlier. The Word document has sections within the document that we see on the far right. First of all, in the middle, we see the table of contents to show you there's some content in there that you can customize. And then the example on the right shows that the template includes formatting for headers, tables, and other styles to assist in building human readable documentation, including that blue code style that I mentioned earlier. The template itself has been used for the documents that the U.S. Navy has published around the adoption of xAPI, and again for the xAPI profile primer itself. Note that there are further details on the U.S. Navy documents within the profile primer. That document lists the URLs for other references, so you can use that as a starting point. At this point, we're going to look at the demo of the profile server. We're going to talk through the opening page. You can see the URLs profiles.usalearning.net, and you can see the slides showing that that first page. And the idea is you scroll down on that first page to the section called Published xAPI Profiles and click on Exploring Profiles. That will take you to the page shown on the right, a list of all the published profiles. So let's go ahead and flip over to a web browser and take a look at what that might look like. This is the page for the profiles profile server. Again, this is the opening page. If you scroll down here, you want to jump into Explore Profiles, and then you see some of the data at the top, but you can scroll past that. Take a look at all the published profiles. If you scroll down to the bottom, you'll see that there are currently 3 pages of current profiles, and the Navy Common Reference profile is listed here. So I'm going to click on that and take us in. Again, I can click on this purple URL that I've visited already to pull up the PDF version. It's going to take a moment for that to load. While it's doing that, we can also navigate over here into statement templates, but you see there's also patterns and concepts. Typically the verbs are part of that concept section, but the other thing to be aware of is within the statement templates, some of those verbs are elaborated. So we talked about opening a file. We click on that. You can see this screen elaborates some of the high-level details, but then we can see an example statement. So there's actually, again, JavaScript within this, JSON within this section to pull out and use as a starting point. And this is actually a preferred place to pull that from. As I mentioned earlier, if you go into the PDF or go into a Word document, you're going to get some extraneous characters. It's better to come over to the statement templates section and copy this example statement from here. The other thing to look at is the determining properties. We're referring to the verb opened and object activity type of file for this particular elaboration for opening a file. The other thing to look at is the statement rules. Rules, it says above here, rules are restrictions on values for specific locations within statements that must be met in order to conform to this template. So in order to meet the standard for xAPI, as well as the specifics of the profile we are viewing, the Navy Common Reference profile, you must include these restrictions. You must meet these restrictions, I should say. And then the associated concepts, we viewed these earlier. We're talking about opened and file, and in this case, there are no other related statement templates, but this would be an area to relate to other templates. We're actually viewing statement templates for opening a file. If it referred to another one, we could see that linkage down below. That's a quick demo of the profile server. So I want to offer thanks to Team xAPI Profile, Laurel, Shatan, Judy, Henry, Julian, and Peter were all extremely helpful for this project. As I mentioned earlier, Shatan, Peter, and Julian were all over the pond and reached out across time zones to meet with us. Then we also wanted to offer thanks to Jason Haig and Duncan Welder, who met with us during the team sessions for Team xAPI Profile. And finally, thanks to Torrance Learning for hosting the xAPI cohort. Thanks to Megan, Matt, Jamie, and Jess. We appreciate it.
All right, thank you very much. So now we're going to move into the work that we did actually creating an xAPI profile. I started this semester saying I wanted to learn about xAPI profiles. We saw a need to create an xAPI profile for PeBL PRo, which is the authoring tool based on the open source PeBL project that was funded by ADL for a number of years. So I said, this is one possible way to go. The team was good enough to say, yes, let's go ahead and do it. And so among the several things we did this semester, we started creating an xAPI profile for PeBL PRo. I'm Judy. We're probably not going to do a whole lot of switching off speakers in the next bit, but I believe all of our team members are here to answer questions in the chat or it looks like people have actually joined as speakers as well. So a lot of these names are familiar, but I do want to introduce my coworker, Mile Divovic, who is the lead engineer on PeBL, on all things PeBL. And I think everyone else, y'all already probably know pretty well. I also want to call out special thanks to Jason Haig, again, specifically for the work on this profile. And we got some expert advice from Art Wittinkin from Risk as well. So without further ado, let's dive in. So why did we want to do this? All the normal reasons that you want to create xAPI profiles were certainly here as well. But this was also another chance for us to add some rigor, add some other eyes on our code, the design of our code, a lot of what the current statements that are emitted by PeBL libraries actually has been influenced by the xAPI cohort before. A few semesters ago, we went through a verb review. And so this was a chance to add some expertise to that and really look at things from a data standardization process. Not only which words are we using, but which concepts are they mapping to in other profiles, et cetera, and really add some rigor to that. And we actually changed a number of things about our xAPI output, which we're going to be implementing in the code in the coming months. So this was a really, really, really valuable exercise for the PeBL team, and we hope that it shows as much value in terms of everybody else being able to use the xAPI emitted by PeBL content and PeBL libraries as well. So where did we start? What was the process that we used? We did start with the xAPI profile Human Readable Template created by Jason Haig and Veracity. And this was a really useful template to tell us, okay, once you actually get into the profile server, into the tool itself, what is the information that you're going to need? What is the everything that you're going to want to put in? So instructional designers, if the xAPI profile server is your authoring tool, you can think of the Human Readable Template as your storyboard. This is where you're planning all of the things that are actually going to go get developed in the authoring tool. I'm really hoping to demystify this, even though we are in track 2 right now. I really want to demystify a lot of things about this process. So this was a really, really useful template to start from. We had some discussions in the last session on profiles that we also actually used an Excel planner to plan out some of the concepts, and I'll show that as well later. So the process for creating an xAPI profile for an existing authoring tool that's already emitting xAPI is not necessarily the same process that everybody is going to go through. Let's say if you're just dreaming up all the things that could be done with it, with assessments, or at one point, PeBL was just a spec called Actionable Data Book, and the profile for that is actually still out there, much of which is legacy and probably should be deprecated. But that you can tell that, you know, at that time, all of the concepts and everything that are in that profile were very much just a kind of imagining this is how we might do things. And there might be, you know, a very different design process involved in creating a profile from that perspective. So creating a profile from this perspective was a little different. The first step that we went to was reviewing our existing activities that were emitting xAPI and which verbs were being used for those xAPI statements. And then saying, okay, we know what words are being used here, but how are they mapping to the existing verbs? Do we need to change any of that? Do we need to change actually what the software itself is doing in terms of the code? So quick flow chart here. When we looked at our existing verbs, we looked at, does this match an existing verb that's in another profile? This, by the way, was dramatically helped with the with Torrance Learning's xAPI profile flattener, because the existing servers that had verbs on them, there just wasn't anything like it. And I know that everybody knows that Torrance creates a lot of tools that fill in gaps in the industry. And this was one that we found particularly helpful. So we had to research, you know, are there existing verbs that can be used? I'm sure that you're starting to get, you're starting to kind of hear the same refrain over and over in terms of the process for creating a profile. If yes, let's link it to that existing verb. If no, then should we actually change the verb that our software is emitting to match something that is more industry standard? Because of course we're willing to do that. We want to promote standards. And so we actually did change some things. I'm showing the Excel spreadsheet that we were working from, or Google Docs and whatever, the spreadsheet that we were working from. Okay, there's an open mic. Maybe Brian, I'm wondering if you can mute, because I'm picking up some background noise, if you would. Anyway, I'm showing all of our warts on this spreadsheet because we had some things that we changed. We certainly had things that we needed to map to different profiles than they were currently mapping to. We had, like I said, one or two verbs that were still in there from the old Actionable Data Book profile, like module feedback, that didn't really mean anything in terms of how people express verbs and use xAPI today. So we did change some things about how the software actually emits verbs. So possibly we would change the software. If no, we would create a new verb and a new definition. And this was a really, really interesting process for an English major, which I was. I guess I'm no longer an English major. I have a degree now. But there were a lot of really interesting questions. From an instructional design perspective, and from the perspective of, you know, how is language used, and from the perspective, of course, of how the technology should work. So here are some examples of things that we really had to think about, and things that we greatly benefited from having people involved who knew a lot about xAPI and knew a lot about how profiles were already being created. So it was super, super useful to have Jason on the team, for example. And to be able to bounce some ideas off of Art as well. So for example, should I track this learner activity at all? We kind of went through a whole set of like, this is something that, you know, the actor is doing something physical with the content. Should we track that? And, you know, if so, why? Is it really learning data, et cetera, et cetera? These are great conversations to have. Some things we chose to track that aren't necessarily learning data, but might give us more insight into how people are using the content and how people are using the reader that Pebble content is served on. So basically we thought if an instructional designer or a UX designer behind the learning content could use it for a UX purpose, that we would keep that as well. And we chose to keep a lot of things, not because it necessarily told us if learning was happening or if an achievement was happening, but it might be used to be, or it might be able to be used to say, oh, this person definitely just flipped through this learning experience, and, you know, didn't participate in, you know, in all the ways. Sometimes there are ways that you can't necessarily tell that they did do a thing. You can't necessarily tell that their eyes were on the video. You can't necessarily tell that whatever is in the video is making it into their brain without some kind of meaningful assessment. So you can't necessarily tell that from their activity in just participating in the learning process. But you might be able to tell when they definitely didn't do something, you know, that you would want them to do or spend the kind of time that you would want them to spend in the content. So all of these, whether you agree with that or not, all of these are really valuable conversations to have about your software and about the learning experiences that you're creating. So going back to, you know, the things that we really benefited from having all of these different expertises on the team, people who could talk about language, people who could talk about instructional design, people who are involved in the software engineering and actually writing the code, people involved in user experience, and then having that background expertise in xAPI. All of these things were super, super valuable. So if you're thinking about creating a profile, I really highly suggest that you think about all of those things and not just about how do we write the code. Actually, we have only started on the PeBL PRo profile, and one of the people that I'm bringing in to the working group is the project manager, my coworker, who is a linguist. So I have an English degree, she has a linguistics one. And so that's going to add a lot to, you know, how we think about the language that we're using. All right, so this was the final rundown of at least the current state of the PeBL PRo profile. We ended up with 34 concepts or verbs. Our closing state right now is that we've only handled the verbs. We haven't handled the other concepts. So right now, when I talk about concepts, it's just verbs. We're linking 24 existing verbs to 6 existing profiles that are out there. And we are creating 10 new verbs that will be part of the profile as well. So all of those are there on the list. And so you see, by the way, there are a lot of nuances that I learned in this process that I didn't necessarily know before. So for example, reported is already an existing verb. However, PeBL PRo uses it in a different way from how it's used in, I can't remember which one, it's either ADL or DoD ISD profile. There is an existing use that means somebody reported out on an experience. So did a book report or did a, you know, an after action report, that kind of thing. But how we use it in the software is that you're reporting a comment that was made by one of your coworkers or another learner. So you're actually elevating that comment up for an admin to see it and potentially moderate it. So again, what do you do when you have, you know, the word is the same, but it's being used in a very different way? That's something that we kind of went through on this team. All right. Third, we created the working group on the profile server and added members. I'm going to go through how we actually did this on the server. I'm going to go through it really quickly because the server, the profile server is super, super easy to use. It's the easiest authoring tool I think I've ever used. I think there are still some things like that it's hard to undo or remove things once you've created them, but just the process of creating the working group and creating the profile itself was incredibly easy. So starting with creating the working group, this is kind of starting from the beginning. You put in your name, etc. You add your members to the working group, and then that's it. You have your working group created. And whenever somebody creates a profile on the xAPI server, you can find them, look them up by name or email address, and add them to your working group. So you need to have a working group before you create a profile. And then your profile is kind of it belongs to that working group, belongs to one of the ones that you are a member of. So creating the profile basically goes like this. You start from the home on xAPI profile server. You go to profiles and create the profile. You choose the working group that it's going to belong to, and there's a really clear button for it, create a new xAPI profile. And you have to put in the things like the name and description that you have prepared for because you've used the Human Readable template. And you know that all of these things are going to be things that you're going to have to put into the profile. So you can link it to an external location, or you can host it internally within the profile, or the profile server, which is what we chose to do. And then you can tag, you can add translations. We don't have any translations as of yet. And click on the create profile button, and your base profile is created. And then I should have said concepts here. Then we created the concepts, which for us was creating the verbs on the profile server. So again, very, very easy process. When you go into your existing profile, you click on you go to the concepts and add concept. And there's a very simple process for each one. You're going through a similar process that you did at the beginning when you planned your concepts, in that you type in or paste in the word that you want to use, and it's going to look for similar words. So it is leading you through that same kind of philosophy where you want to link to existing concepts where possible. So it's going to actually kind of try to get you to do that, which I think is great and very, very helpful. So it will try to find those concepts that might be actually the ones that you want to link to. So if you haven't already planned out which existing concepts you're linking to, it will try to get you to do that. So if you are adding existing concepts, which for the most part is what we were doing, then it will suggest some for you, and you can pick one, see the existing information for it, and add it to the selected profile. So very, very easy process. And then if you are creating a new concept, again, you're going to start at the same place, add concept. And so, for example, hid was one of our new verbs. And it's not the same as any of the suggested ones. We knew we were going to have to create a new verb. Then it takes you through, so you go to create new instead of add selected to profile, create new, and you are led through the process to create a new concept. First of all, specifying which type of concept it is, and then putting in all of the information that you have planned on that verb. Because again, you've used the Human Readable template and you've planned out all of this stuff. So each one needs a description, etc. And so at this point, our work is not done on the PeBL PRo profile. We have created the verbs, but we have not put in statement templates for all of the verbs yet. So we do need to do that, as well as creating all of the other concept types that will be part of the xAPI profile. And then, of course, hopefully ending eventually with getting the profile verified, which I actually wasn't able to determine that any profiles are verified at this point, because you can filter by that on the profile server. So I don't know entirely what is involved in that process, but that will be for future work. And so this is the current state. It is in an unpublished draft right now. Actually, the reason for that it is not published, other than only having verbs, is that I have to figure out how to delete one because I accidentally put in a verb twice, linked it to two different other existing profiles. So right now we have 35 concepts instead of 34. And once we do that, and at least do the basic, like the statement templates behind the verbs, we will publish the draft so that at least it can start being used. So that is the current state. And this is, again, all of our team. And I wanted to, I hope I didn't rush through too quickly, but I wanted to allow some time for questions.
Well done, Judy.
Well, thank you.
I apologize for the open mic.
No worries. Yes, Duncan, data for program evaluation versus data on student performance, which, I don't know how much that was really an intended use of xAPI, but I see more and more, I see people talking about that more and more, and see some conference presentations on it sometimes. And I think that is a great use. Yes, both of which are super important. Actually, Megan and Jess and I had a conversation about it and did a little video blog about it fairly recently because they have some very interesting experience in doing that with their clients as well. And I think so. I mean, I think both are super important. And there's been such a focus on UX, much needed and welcome focus on UX in the instructional design world over the past 10 years that I think more and more we need to be working on how to use that xAPI data for formative evaluation and UX evaluation. Thank you, Brent. I appreciate it. I have a support email in already to y'all. So great. Awesome. I don't know. I can't remember what I said that was an opportunity to use two LRSs. But yes, we do work with all of the major LRSs. PeBL PRo is PolyMLRS, so you can report to all of them. Any other questions? Oh, just thinking. Oh, got it. Yes, highly likely. All right. Well, oh, great. We had it all over to do all over again. Question for both projects. What would you do? Oh, okay. Could you move from the ADB profile? How did you decide what to keep and what to change? So a lot of what was in the ADB profile was not necessarily sort of phrased in the perspective of, verbs, which is interesting. I don't entirely know what the reasoning was for behind that. That's actually before my time. And actually a lot of the work that we did in replacing old ADB stuff was a few semesters ago when we had a team PeBL in the xAPI profile or in the xAPI party cohort. We had a team PeBL in the cohort. And one of the things that we did was kind of reviewed the verbs and said, okay, is this, as instructional designers, is this what I want to be able to use? Is this how I want, the xAPI to be phrased? And does this make sense? Is it standard with the way that other activity providers might emit xAPI. And so we definitely found that there were some instances where that was not the case. And I think that the one I had on the slide, I'm not entirely sure why it wasn't changed, but just a legacy item in there. It's highly possible, though, that it wasn't changed because it was, it's actually a new verb. It didn't map to any of the existing verbs. So that particular concept is one that was just new, and it may not have gotten, it may just have gotten missed in terms of deciding what the verb was actually going to be. So that was kind of an interesting process. And actually, if you look at the primer that we put together, that Brian's video took everybody through, Actionable Data Book is one of the profiles that we are recommending be deprecated because it's it was clearly for a spec. The project moved on after that, and the project is still very much in development and in use. It's I think that the question of what to do with deprecated profiles is a really good one right now, because we actually identified a few that probably are not being kept up to date, or in an up to date enough state to be really useful by the industry.
Yeah, ideally, we'd be able to archive them within the profile server and make them still available, but not on the active list when people are searching.
Yep. And that was actually the question of, I said we ran into some interesting questions with the slide with the thought bubbles. What do we do if we actually want to link to a concept, but it's in a profile that we think should be deprecated? In one case, the profile, the concept that we wanted to link to was actually in the Actionable Data Book profile. I created a new verb, or I'm proposing creating a new verb for it, partly because the definition of what that verb would include has expanded since it was originally conceived back in the Actionable Data Book project, but also because I just think that that's the one profile that I feel like I can authoritatively say this should be deprecated. And it should be replaced with the PeBL PRo profile. So in that case, we definitely created a new verb. In some of the other cases, we actually did link to other profiles that may or may not be super up to date. Thank you, Brent. Yeah, I appreciate that. I think it's a really good, it's a really interesting conversation. Any other, Megan, you also asked if you had it to do over again, a question for both projects. What would you do? I would probably have started earlier on the creation of the profile itself. There was much more to it, which was the purpose of doing this, to learn all of what was involved. But that's fine, because now we have a pre-built team for next semester. So anybody, I'm just going to go ahead and make a, and shill for next semester. Anyone interested in learning about profiles and actually working on an existing tool or an existing profile that maps to an existing tool, we would love to have your input and your involvement next semester. Like I said, we're going to be moving beyond the verbs and going to activities and such. So that's my plan anyway. I hope that some people will join.
And
Yes.
Megan, the profile primer is along the same lines. It really started with my desire to understand what a roadmap for building a vocabulary for a project should look like. And as things progressed and I started asking people in the know what I should look at, I had a number of different responses leading me in different directions. So my idea was try to give them an order of precedence and have them build one on top of each other. But it's definitely a version 1.0, and that's why it's out there in GitHub. So as the cohorts continue, we can look at adding our knowledge into that format and letting it be a starting point for others as well. And as Megan mentioned in the chat, I look forward to the xAPI cohort for spring 2022, starting January 20th.
Thanks, everyone. We will go out and take over table 1 if anybody has any additional questions.